Let's move on to Act 2. I call this 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This is a difficult act because it is 50% of your story. And it's difficult to outline what you should do because every Act 2 of every movie is different. Different circumstances happen. And when you read books, it can get confusing. They use these terms about like midpoint reversal and some of these things that are just too overwhelming for my mind, at least, to comprehend. So what I try to focus on is, at the end of Act 1, my character has made a nice try. They're still following their faulty desires as to what will bring them happiness. But now they're making an irrational decision that they think is going to help them achieve their goals. The main thing you need to know about Act 2 is that this is number one, the bulk of your screenplay, but it's that your main character will start to achieve his or her goal, and then they're going to face setbacks. They will achieve, not achieve. It's kind of like sorry, not sorry. They will achieve, not achieve. This is the plot of your film. So what is plot? Your plot is determined by your character, what they do in the story. She or he drives the story. Plot happens when a character does something unusual or in a way they've never done before, or when they start to enter this special world, or when an unusual thing happens to them in life, like a villain shows up, or their inner demons start to come out. They're an alcoholic and they start to, go on benders, whatever that may be. This is the plot of your film. It's determined by what your character does in the story. So let's ask first, who is my villain? My inner demon? Now, if you're writing a romantic comedy, you might be thinking, well, I'm not going to have a villain. When you think of like a bad guy coming up and twirling his mustache. No, you're not. But you need to remember that it could be the demons that haunt them. That's the villain. Either way, this is something that they're going to have to face directly near the end of the second act. So, is your villain another character? And if yes, who is your villain? This person, if it is a person, isn't just here to block your lead. This should be a character who's competing for the same goal as your lead character. You'll get more dramatic tension when you put them into direct conflict. So, I'm going to stick with this film that we've been talking about. In Belleville, the villain was Willie's neighbor, Arlene.
Spell his name backwards. A-L-I-E-N.
He's not an alien.
Everyone is freaked out by you and your little house pet, Willie.
That's not true. You should have seen him at the concert. Everybody likes him.
Yeah, well, they won't when I'm done with them.
She had suspicions about the stranger living with him, and those suspicions kept growing, and she continued to get more intense about her nosiness and her involvement. She was driven by the fact that she was also a loner.
Are you like a hoarder?
No.
Why do you have a copy of Modern Menopause? Aren't you a little young for that?
I can't get them to stop sending it. I ordered one food magazine and they keep sending me all this crap.
I think you're a bit of a hoarder.
Yeah, well, maybe when your husband leaves you for a holistic healer, you hold on to crap you can control. Is that what you want to hear?
It's been years, Arlene.
Okay, well, thanks to the magic of social media, my husband is in my life.
Stop looking at the pictures.
You know what? They're a beautiful family, especially with that adopted baby from Guam.
This is a villain character, Arlene, who has the same goals as the main character, which is leaving life the way it is, being angry and bitter, distrusting others. She's kind of just the female version of him. But where she becomes a villain is she tries to prevent him from going on the journey that he needs to go on to become a more whole man. So, villains are always great if they kind of have the same goal. It is more compelling when the villain has some good in them. If they can see why they are the way they are, because remember, no villain sees himself or herself as a villain. Bad people don't see themselves as bad people. People who are toxic don't see toxicity within them. A villain is the hero of their own story. So, their behavior and actions make complete sense to them. They are the hero of their own story. They're just not a hero in ours. So when writing a villain speech, you need to make the audience believe it. Okay, when you're writing dialogue and when you're writing their big speech, make the audience believe that they believe it. Your villain should be far more powerful than your main character. And what do I mean by that? Your villain is not a credible threat if they are weaker than your main character. So certainly think of that when you come into crime movies or movies that involve a true villain, like a murderous type character or a greedy corporate overlord or whatever it may be. They need to be more powerful than your main character, because that's what's all the more impressive when your main character by the end of the film is able to stand up to them, overpower them, escape from them, whatever it may be.
He left this morning. He went home. He went back to Canada.
That whack job ain't from Canada. I'm gonna be calling the cops regardless. There are parking violations left and right all over my property, your property.
Take it all in, Arlene.
What?
This moment. It's the last time you'll ever be on my property. I got some work to do.
Okay, now let's talk about if your villain isn't another character. What if your villain is internal within your main character? Kind of going back and kind of describing the ghost, the backstory, but sometimes it's just referred to as the shadow. I know I'm throwing a lot of terms out, so I don't care whether you call it a villain or a shadow or a ghost. This is basically their inner conflict and turmoil and their past. So as good as it gets, the shadow is Jack Nicholson's inability to be vulnerable or to connect with another human being. I mean, frankly, Jack Nicholson's character is not far from my farmer character, Willie. They both have that same problem. Now, in Jack Nicholson's character, he's got OCD and plenty of other issues that my farmer character doesn't have, but the shadow's main function, or the villain's main function, is to take your lead character through a huge test and to bring out the best in them. Okay, so in Act 2, we have obligatory scenes that need to happen. So they really start to suggest themselves. This is the fun of the movie, but it's also a tough process. Remember, we're achieving, not achieving. So take some time right now to list obligatory scenes that have to happen in your story to get to the end. Don't get bogged down by every single scene that needs to be in Act 2, because that can be overwhelming. Just start with, here's my irrational decision at the end of Act 1. It's not working, so now this needs to happen. And then, of course, this needs to happen. Well, and then this complication needs to happen. And then this will happen, and it will move my character towards their goal. But then this will come along, and it'll set them back. And then obviously this needs to happen. So that's what you're basically doing. You're just writing like, this is what they try, this is how it fails, achieve, not achieve. So write out the obligatory scenes as best as you know them. In this section, I am now going to switch to a film I made called The Racket. And we are going to go through the obligatory scenes in Act 2 of my film just to show you the process that I went through when writing that project. Okay, so in Act 2, your characters attempt a goal. It might be to find love, to start their own business, to discover and expose the robot living on an island, whatever. First, in Act 1, we had established these goals. She can't afford her house.
But it's true, young lady. I want to keep the house that my husband worked so tirelessly to build.
Which was her external need. And Winky needed to find friendship or companionship in her life because she was bored and lonely.
Why the hell not? This is the most fun I've had since I've had all my original deeds.
So what did that internal need do? It earned empathy from the audience. Because who doesn't have empathy for an older lady living alone in a huge house? She can't afford it, she's going to lose it. That's terrible. She's going to become homeless, possibly. Or the fact that she's just bored and lonely. I mean, that is a universal theme that we've all faced from time to time, and it's terrifying for most people to feel lonely. So that was all Act 1. Now let's get to Act 2. In Act 2, she's going to start achieving / not achieving. So Winky here, the character with the big glasses on, and her new friends, they're now fired from their multi-level marketing group, and now they must come up with a plan. This is where we sort of begin in Act 2. So let me ask you, what is your character's initial plan here in Act 2? Okay, the next obligatory scenes is that they're going to have to come up with a bigger plan. And so the 4 women make a crazy scheme to harvest miracle water from a local mine. They can bottle it and they can sell it as a miraculous cure. This plan is big and it was visual and it keeps the audience interest. So make your plan or your plot as big as you can. That's 2 steps forward. Now, in my case, I knew I had access to a mine, and I also knew it was a ridiculous plan, but because I was writing a bit of a broad comedy here, I knew I could get into sort of cartoony territory. But, so they're harvesting miracle water from a mine. Does your character have a harebrained scheme to find love, or to beat the giant lizard creatures, or to capture the golden ring, or to confront their attacker? What faulty plan have they set upon? Ask yourself that. That's basically what I was doing here when I was creating this miracle water plan for my characters. So now they found water in the mine, so this is my next obligatory scene, but they need the manpower to gather the water. So they had just taken 2 steps forward, now they're taking 1 step back. They come up with a new plan. Now they're going to utilize Winky's great-grandson Cooper, and he's going to get children from his class to help harvest water. Again, this is a very cartoony movie, and we're not going for realism necessarily in this, but now we've got the children on board, and now we're taking 2 steps forward because water is being harvested for these women. And I want to ask you now, how does your character progress towards their goal? Because that's what I'm doing with my characters now. I'm helping them progress. Take 2 steps forward. And now we've got a progressive complication, meaning the complication has progressed. Now we learn that Winky's grandson Cooper, this boy's father, is showing up to remind Winky that he needs to start finding buyers for her house. You know, he is the villain in this story. So the villain has showed up.
Hey,
Hey, what?
you need to respect your grandmother.
She needs to realize that I paid her taxes on this place and that she owes me money.
And he is always keeping that ticking time clock going. We're always trying to establish a time clock that turns up the heat on our plot, turns up the pressure on our main character. Obviously, action films almost always have a, in Speed, it's like the bus can't go below 80 or whatever. Every good tense movie has a ticking time clock going. And you can even do this in comedies like I'm doing here. You can even do this in a drama. If you don't make a relationship work between 2 people, he's going to get on a boat and be shipped off to war. So there's a ticking time clock. So anyway, Jeremy is the villain in Winky's story. It's making the audience even more nervous for Winky. So now it's 1 step back. So just when she was getting ahead, now she goes back. That's the whole meat and potatoes of Act 2. And I don't know why I just use that phrase because I'm a vegetarian. That's the whole tofu and potatoes of Act 2. Okay, now the women know that they need to get older young people involved. So they are signing up a bunch of 20-something kids to recruit converts to their business. It's like it wasn't enough to sort of exploit little children's labor. Now it's like we got to get some healthy 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds in this.
Well, the Miracle Water Club is a safe house. It creates communion with one another.
I like that.
It's a very American product. Do you consider yourself good citizens?
Yeah.
Well, that's good, because you can join our cult. Club. I know it starts with a C.
They shoot a sexy commercial, for example, with these millennials. And now the big scene happens where they get to watch the commercial play back. And now the sexy commercial they shoot is a hit. And the phone starts ringing. And so we've taken 2 steps forward. How are you moving your character forward? But now, of course, because we went forward, it's time to escalate our crisis. So now this multi-level marketing scheme is starting to turn into a cult.
Did we just start a cult?
The children and the young adults are all becoming disciples. And they're not just employees anymore. You know, I don't know if they were ever getting paid, so they were all kind of disciples. But as the women start to manipulate the public into buying their spiritual products, they're now facing a moral crisis. And we're going to talk about the moral argument coming up. This is the moment in this movie where it's starting to see there's a moral argument here. Because Pearl, who is the most religious of the 4 women, she has a crisis of faith and she quits the group.
I'm sorry, girls, but I quit.
She's done. She quit. She's out. So this is escalating crisis. This is a big one to have one of the 4 women quit. So what is your big step back in your movie? What's your big step back? What's your big escalating crisis? Now your character is getting nearer the villain. Okay, the villain can be obvious, like when Luke Skywalker gets sucked into the Death Star by Darth Vader, or it can be an internal villain, an internal fear that they're really starting to approach and get close. So how is your main character getting nearer to their villain, whatever that may be? The next obligatory scene is the big lie. Okay? Just before you reach the climax, which is basically the end of Act 2, and again, this has all been like 50% of your movie, and you had the first 25%. So you're 75% the way there when you reach the climax, but you really want to pile on the drama. Okay, so in my movie, Winky stands from her wheelchair, and all her new disciples are watching, and the converts are shocked that she can stand because she's been in a wheelchair the whole movie.
And it has. You can walk.
It's a miracle. There are healing powers in miracle water.
I could always walk. I just have restless leg syndrome.
Here's the big lie. Virginia shouts out, "It's a miracle, she can walk." Well, why is this dramatic? It's dramatic because the lie is growing out of control. All this manipulation of people's minds and getting people to, all because you're just trying to sell them a product and make money. Yes, the intentions are good. They're trying to raise enough money to save Winky from losing her house. So they have good intentions, but they've kind of grown out of control and the lie has gotten big, and your main character is now living a lie. For example, maybe they're now convinced that they love someone that they don't, or they believe they've conquered their fear, but they haven't actually. Maybe they're convinced they have a solution to buy back the freedom of the town, but it's all a big lie. So you really want to introduce a big lie leading up to this climax. So what is your character's big lie? Let's go back and discuss the moral argument. So somewhere in the middle of Act 2, your script should start to have a moral argument. Obviously, in Act 1, your main character had a goal, and then it ended up in an inciting incident that set your character on a path. But in Act 2, at the beginning of Act 2, your main character took an action to reach their goal. Of course, it didn't work out. In the middle of Act 2, the main character starts losing to the villain. So, in my case, Winky is losing to her grandson who is selling her house, but she's also losing in the moral argument because it's kind of growing too strong. The main character becomes desperate and they start to take immoral or illogical steps to reach their goal. She or he will be criticized by the villain oftentimes, the way her grandson Jeremy dismisses all this stuff she's doing with these other ladies. So they're usually dismissed. Sometimes they're even dismissed by their ally, by their best friend or their supporter in the movie. The ally may tell them that he or she is wrong. But by the end of Act 2, the main character is going to defend herself or himself until getting to the battle of self-revelation and realizing they've been wrong. So basically, until they get to this big climax where they realize they're wrong, or they've believed the wrong thing, or they've had faulty desire and it's been wrong all along. That's what we're trying to get to at the end of Act 2. Act 3 is going to be the resolve following the climax, so we'll get to Act 3 shortly. But by now, we should know our script's moral argument. Sometime by the middle of Act 2, you should know what that is. In The Racket, the moral argument was quite clear by the time Pearl quit her group. This was the time when, she was morally against the manipulative direction they were taking in their business, and she quit. And we, the audience, now know, okay, this movie is about how easy it is to manipulate people when you add in religiosity or spirituality. And that's what these women are doing. Miracle water. They're claiming they've got the solution for people's inner spiritual conflict. And they're being shady doing it. They don't mean to, but it grows out of control. And we have learned that the moral argument of this movie is, and it's quite clearly stated at the end of the movie, but that the moral argument is you need to be aware and cautious of monolithic thinking. And that really was the moral argument I had in mind as I started to write this story. It was sort of like the old women start a business and it turns into a cult. That was like the elevator pitch. If I was trapped in an elevator with someone for 30 seconds and they go, oh, what's your movie about? It's about 4 older women that find friendship and start a business, but in the end they find that it turns into a cult. Okay, that's kind of the funny one-sentence elevator pitch. But what that movie really was about is beware of monolithic thinking. That was the moral argument I was making. So what is your script's moral argument? Ask yourself. Remember, the moral argument is what will give your script depth. It's the area where your main character is unlikable. And it is okay for your main character, even if they're the hero, it's okay for them to be unlikable. What these women in The Racket did, these are very lovable characters, but they were doing the wrong thing. They were taking the wrong approach. So now we get to the climax, the end of Act 2. The climax in The Racket is when an officer from the Missouri Consumer Affairs shows up and knows that this miracle water scheme is a scam.
Done. I'm shutting you down. We're done here. Everyone head out.
She pulls her business license, threatens to shut the whole business down. So now Winky is once again faced with losing her house. And she's still got her grandson on her back, showing people the house. So the villain is present. The villain is applying pressure. And the climax of this movie is when this entire business, which was their faulty plan for saving Winky, when it's all getting shut down by the authorities because of the escalating or the progressive bad behavior they've demonstrated by taking things too far. So the climax describes when the world has closed in on your lead character. You know, the guy tells the guy that he loves him and that he wants to spend the rest of his life with him, and then suddenly that guy is dating someone new. Or they reach the bottom of the cave only to discover that there seems to be no buried treasure inside. Or the woman finally finds her birth mother through DNA only to find out that her mother passed 2 months ago. So what is the climax of your movie? What is the end of your Act 2 that you've been building to? Now, as you outline your movie, you need to avoid this. You need to avoid a passive lead character. Are things just happening to your character and they're not doing anything in response? You know, Winky, as the lead character in The Racket, things are happening to her, but she's responding. So she's unable to harvest miracle water, so she responds by recruiting her great-grandson. The water takes off, but then there's a setback because there's a pushback from the public. She responds to that. Her grandson comes in and tells her he's starting to show the house. She responds to that. So your main character, they need to not be passive, they need to be active. Movies move. You know, cinema means movement in Greek. So your character should move, and they should be making choices, and they should be taking action. So what is your lead character doing in Act 2 to take action? You know, you need to make him or her suffer. You need to not only do that, but you need to make sure they are responding to the suffering. So how is your character moving? Ask yourself this. Or how is your character responding and making choices and moving to action? And this is a little side note. Please remember that your plot does not move forward during an action scene. It's misleading because action scenes feel like a lot of plot momentum, and they really aren't. Plot comes with the outcome of the action. So when Willie and Neil are finally having this sort of violent, sloppy, physical showdown, throwing each other around the room because of a violation Neela made, the plot is not moving forward during that fight. It's exciting to watch, but the plot moves forward after we find out what the result of that fight was. So when two people are fighting on a train, the plot has stopped until we discover who wins the fight. So don't confuse action with plot. These are some scene must-haves. These are 5 things. One of these 5 things your scenes should all have. Each scene in your movie. Number 1, it should either reveal new details the audience needs to know and reveal more about our character. So that's the first thing. Secondly, or as another option, a scene should have an emotion point. Does it capture part of the audience's heart? You know, Winky has this Thanksgiving moment with her great-grandson, Cooper.
This is my Thanksgiving sacrifice.
Oh, baby.
Here we go. It's not everything you need for your mortgage, but a lot of these coins are silver dollars.
Oh, baby. That's so sweet. Come here.
It's all right if Winky has to go to a nursing home because she can't raise the money to keep her house. It's okay. Winky loves you.
And that is a point that captures the audience's heart. Who isn't going to sympathize with a moment like that? A child giving everything they have to their great-grandmother. So that particular scene doesn't necessarily move the plot forward, but it stops for a beat to have an emotional point that connects the audience to the characters, adds empathy. Or, thirdly, a scene could have a visual idea. That could be an amazing costume, that could be a cool set, that could be some great visual jokes in a comedy, or that could be some special effects. As long as they're running concurrently with your plot and they make sense, great. If a scene is all about sort of dazzling the audience and moving the story forward, that's another thing. Number 4, obviously conflict. We've talked about this a ton. Does it showcase conflict for the characters? Is it filled with intention and obstacles for the characters? Almost every scene has this. The only exception would be if you're resolving conflict at the end of the movie. In Act 3, then you're not showing conflict, you're kind of resolving conflict. And then the 5th thing a scene should have, if, 1 out of 5 of these at least, is a story point. Does this scene move your plot forward? You could argue that every scene should move your plot forward, but every now and then you make an exception and you have an emotional point here or there. Okay, now let's talk about pacing. Pacing, the general commandment we're following is thou shalt not bore. You don't want to make your audience beg for the end of the movie. You don't want to expect your editor to keep your movie going. Editors can do a lot of magic in the room, but they can't fix a broken script or the fact that you didn't include enough interesting story notes and pacing within your script. You really want to focus on the number of actions per minute. So, here are some beats for Act 2 of my film, The Mutts. Now, I'm just going to show you here storyboard photos because we haven't made this movie as the time I'm recording this. So, just check out these photos as I basically quickly walk you through the beats of Act 2, and then you can see how I've tried to inject action throughout this Act 2 with achieving and not achieving, but including action that gives us pacing that keeps our young audience's interest, since this movie is intended for children. So in Act 1, just the setup of this movie, everything that's in Act 1 is basically Taika's a mutt. He lives in the forest with his parents. He's an only child. He's scared of other animals, even little squirrels. And he's not a leader. He doesn't even know how to socialize, really. And then tragically, his parents, this is the inciting incident, his parents drown in a river during a rainstorm, and he survives, and he is then homeless, and then he's picked up by a human, and he's taken to a pound. So all that happens in the first 25% of my movie in Act 1, ending with the inciting incident. And he hasn't really made an irrational decision. It's kind of like against his will. He's been thrown in a pound. So now I think we cut to 2 years later. He's in a pound with 3 other prominent friends that we're focused on, and suddenly we meet the villain. The villain shows up with her guard dog, and she's threatening to kill all the other dogs in 1 week if they haven't found a home. So we literally have a ticking time clock. This is the worst. All these sweet little dogs in the pound are going to be killed in a week. It's very 101 Dalmatians as far as that. And so Taika and his 3 friends are going to have to come up with their first plan, and this is to have a prison break. And so they do. They plan, they come up with a scheme, and then they start to execute it. And unfortunately, one step back, they can't save the others. There are like 40 other dogs in the pound that weren't able to escape before the villain showed up with her guard dog. So these 4, Taika and his 3 friends, escape through the tunnels. So we've got pacing going on, action, pacing, action, action. They meet a human friend out on the street. They come up through a manhole, meet a human friend, a bus driver named Oscar. He says that they can come stay with him. He happens to sort of live in a church where he's a janitor. 2 steps forward. But then they decide that we have to attempt. It's our moral obligation to attempt to break back into the pound and save our friends. So how are they going to do this? They try to return the next day through the tunnels, once again, bringing pacing in, and suddenly the hole is filled with cement 1 step back. All right, they're defeated. Now how are they going to save their friends? Well, they go back to Oscar and they say, hey, can you go to the pound and offer to buy our friends freedom? Good plan, right? Well, he goes there, he finds out the villain wants to charge him $4,000 for the freedom of the dogs, which he obviously doesn't have. So now we take a step back. So Tyke, meanwhile, is learning to face his own personal demons, okay? His personal demons is the fear that controls him, and by now he's starting to become more and more of a leader. So his character has an arc. His character is on a journey. He is in that special world now where he must face his inner demons and face his inner fear. By the way, fear is going to be the inner demon of almost all of your movie characters. Why is that? Because humans live in fear, even if it's below the surface. And things don't get done in the world because of our fear. So it's such a universal trait that when you are writing, you are probably going to find that fear is the inner demon of your character, a fear of one thing or the next. So anyway, the dogs are now enrolled in a dog competition where there's a big grand prize that they need to win. And there are some wins in this competition, and then there are some setbacks, because what would Act 2 be without a series of wins and setbacks? You know, we're achieving, not achieving. The villain now reappears. Now this is where we're nearing the villain. Remember that happens in Act 2. We're nearing the villain. It's getting, the heat is turned up. She is having her German Shepherd compete in this competition, and he is a winner who has won past competitions. So this is going to be a tough guy to beat. And she, of course, needs to remind the dogs she's about to kill all their friends. It looks like evil's going to win. It's now, because of our losses, we've got some of our other dogs have been eliminated from the competition, and only Tyke, our lead character, can save the day as he competes against the German Shepherd. Tyke, the dog, has two villains. He has got the literal villain of the German Shepherd he's competing against, who's bigger and stronger, and he's got his fear of being inadequate, his internal villain. And he's got his ghost, the fact that his backstory is his mom and dad have died, and, you know, I'm sure he wants to honor their legacy as well. We have a moral argument in this movie. Remember, in Act 2, the moral argument starts to become clear. There's a moral argument here that a culture that doesn't embrace and celebrate diversity is a morally inferior culture. It's a morally inferior society. That is the moral argument below the surface of this film. And by the end, I think that's pretty clear. It's at least clear to adults who are watching. You never know how much a child is going to be able to comprehend. They might just be connected with Tyke's struggle, the physical struggle against the German Shepherd dog, like the race. Might be the only thing that appeals to the kids. But adults watching the movie know that this is a real commentary on society and how it disregards outsiders. So we keep the pacing up with, number one, intention and obstacles. That's one of our ways of keeping up the pacing. And number two, we've got a ticking time bomb going, 1 week until your friends die. And number three, we've got cool visuals, something interesting to feast our eyes on. And number four, we've got some verbal and physical comedy. So that's always good. Get some laughs in there. And number five, we got a moral argument underneath it all. And all of those things contribute to the pacing of your film, keeping it interesting. And that is going to bring us up to Act 3, the climax. And this is where good is going to meet evil. You've got to get your characters to that final moment before you can enjoy the payoff at the very end. So Act 3 is coming up. That is our final 25% of our film. That is always the most fun to write because you're tying up loose ends and things like that. But I hope I've been able to outline for you in Act 2 the basic idea as you build towards this climactic ending. The basic idea is that 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Another way of thinking of that is your character achieves, they don't achieve. They try something bigger, then they get a setback. You just keep going in that momentum for the bulk of your film, 50% of your film.